We can't keep doing this, Vivienne. It's too much. My sister Gabrielle's voice cut through the sterile air of the oncology ward as I lay connected to the chemotherapy IV, poison flowing through my veins to kill the cancer eating away at my body. The constant hospital visits, the stress, the financial burden of helping you. We have our own lives to consider. She avoided my eyes as she spoke, her designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest like a shield. Maybe it's time. You considered other arrangements. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I said nothing, simply closing my eyes as the nausea medication fought against the waves of sickness washing over me. 6 months later, they all received the same message. Landing in Millbrook tomorrow. We need to talk. V. The private jet's engines were already warming up. But let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because the story of how my own family abandoned me during the darkest period of my life, only to come crawling back when they discovered what I'd become, is one that still keeps me awake at night. Before we dive deeper into this tale of betrayal and ultimate vindication, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's video reveals something that will absolutely blow your mind. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Memorial Hospital had become as familiar to me as my own reflection, though that reflection had changed dramatically over the past 8 months. Gone was the thick auburn hair that had been my pride, replaced by a collection of colorful scarves that my best friend Marisol brought each week. Gone, too, was the healthy glow I'd maintained through years of morning runs along the Clearwater River that wound through our small city of Millbrook, replaced by the pallor that seemed to follow chemotherapy patients like a shadow. Stage 3 breast cancer. 3 words that had shattered my world on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by Dr. Harrison Chen with the practiced gentleness of someone who'd given this news too many times before. At 34, I'd thought I was invincible. I ran a small but successful marketing consultancy from my downtown loft, had a circle of friends who felt more like family, and had just signed the lease on a bigger office space to accommodate my growing business. The diagnosis changed everything. My company, Meridian Marketing, had been my baby for 6 years. Built from nothing but determination and a laptop in my studio apartment, it had grown into something I was genuinely proud of. We specialized in digital campaigns for small businesses throughout the tri-state area, and our client retention rate was something my competitors envied. But cancer doesn't care about business plans or client deadlines. Within weeks of starting treatment, I'd had to step back from day-to-day operations, leaving my small team to handle projects while I fought for my life. The Thornfield family, my family, had initially rallied around me with what seemed like genuine concern. My older sister Gabrielle, a real estate agent who'd married into money and never let anyone forget it, promised she'd help coordinate my care schedule. My younger brother Marcus, fresh out of law school and working at a prestigious firm in the state capital, assured me he'd handle any legal matters that arose with my business or insurance. Even my parents, Richard and Patricia Thornfield, successful accountants who'd built their practice in Millbrook's historic downtown district, pledged their full support. Family takes care of family, my father had declared during our first family meeting after the diagnosis, his hand heavy on my shoulder, as we sat around my parents' dining room table in their sprawling Victorian home on Elm Ridge Drive. Whatever you need, sweetheart. Whatever it takes. Those words felt like a promise, a foundation I could lean on while my body was systematically broken down and rebuilt through surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. For the first few weeks, they kept that promise. Gabrielle drove me to appointments, when Marisol couldn't. Marcus helped me navigate the insurance maze when my coverage initially balked at covering certain treatments. My parents brought meals and sat with me during the worst of the chemo sessions, But as the weeks turned into months and my treatment stretched from what we'd hoped would be a brief interruption into what was clearly going to be a long, exhausting campaign, the cracks in their support began to show. It started small. Gabrielle began arriving late to pick me up for appointments, then started asking if I could find other transportation because she had important showings that couldn't be rescheduled. Marcus stopped returning my calls about insurance issues, claiming he was swamped with cases at the firm. My parents' visits became shorter and less frequent, with my mother often checking her phone throughout our conversations. The breaking point came during my 14th chemotherapy session, the one that knocked me flat for 6 days and left me unable to keep even water down. I'd called Gabrielle, desperate for someone to pick up groceries and medication from the pharmacy. Her response still echoes in my memory. "Vivienne, I know you're going through a lot, but you have to understand that the rest of us have lives. 2. This constant crisis mode is exhausting for everyone. Everyone except the person actually fighting cancer, apparently." The final abandonment came exactly 3 weeks later, delivered with the casual cruelty that only family members can truly master. Gabrielle had arrived at the hospital during my morning treatment session, but instead of settling in for the usual awkward small talk, she remained standing, her posture rigid with what I initially mistook for concern. "We've been talking," she began, and I immediately knew who "we" referred to. The Thornfield Family Council had convened, and I hadn't been invited. "About your situation, about what's sustainable for all of us moving forward." Marcus appeared in the doorway as if summoned, his expensive suit and confident bearing marking him as someone far too important to spend his afternoons in oncology wards. Even my parents materialized, though they hung back near the entrance, as if maintaining plausible deniability about their participation in whatever intervention this was meant to be. "The thing is," Gabrielle continued, her voice taking on the practice tone she used with difficult real estate clients, "this whole situation has become incredibly disruptive to all our lives. The constant emergencies, the financial strain of helping out, the emotional burden. It's affecting our marriages, our careers, our own children." I stared at her, the chemotherapy drugs making my thoughts feel sluggish, but not so much that I couldn't understand exactly what was happening. My own family was presenting me with a cost-benefit analysis of my cancer treatment. Marcus stepped forward, his lawyer training evident in how he'd prepared his remarks. "We've researched some excellent facilities that specialize in long-term care for cancer patients. Places where you'd have professional support around the clock, where the burden wouldn't fall on family members who aren't equipped to handle medical emergencies." "Burden," I repeated, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "That's not what we meant," my mother said quickly, finally finding her voice. But her eyes wouldn't meet mine, and the damage was already done. "We just think," my father added, "that you might be more comfortable somewhere with specialized care. And frankly, sweetheart, we think it might be better for your recovery if you're not constantly worried about imposing on family." The audacity of reframing their abandonment as concern for my recovery was breathtaking. But it was Gabrielle's final words that cut deepest, delivered with the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. "We can't keep doing this, Vivienne. It's too much. The constant hospital visits, the stress, the financial burden of helping you. We have our own lives to consider. Maybe it's time you considered other arrangements." And just like that, I understood that I was completely alone. What none of them knew, what I'd been carefully keeping from everyone except my financial advisor and closest friend, was that my small marketing consultancy had been far more successful than I'd ever let on. The modest lifestyle I maintained, the downtown loft, the practical car, the simple wardrobe, all deliberate choices to avoid the complications that money brings to family relationships. But as I lay in that hospital bed, watching my family walk away from me in my darkest hour, I realized it was time to stop hiding who I'd really become. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. To understand the magnitude of what my family threw away that day in the hospital, you need to know who I was before cancer changed everything, before the diagnosis that would reveal the true character of everyone around. Me. My life in Millbrook had been carefully constructed to appear ordinary, even modest. Each morning, I'd wake up in my 800-square-foot loft apartment above Rossetti's Italian Bakery on Main Street, the smell of fresh bread and espresso drifting up through the old building's thin floors. The exposed brick walls were decorated with local artwork I'd purchased from struggling artists, and my furniture came from estate sales and antique shops scattered throughout the Clearwater Valley. To anyone looking from the outside, I was exactly what I appeared to be. A hard-working small business owner making a comfortable but unremarkable living in a charming but unremarkable small city. My Honda Civic was 7 years old but well-maintained. My wardrobe consisted mainly of professional but affordable pieces from department stores. When I met friends for dinner, we usually chose family-owned restaurants where entrees rarely exceeded $20. But appearances, as I'd learned early in my business career, can be the most powerful tool in your arsenal when used correctly. The truth was that Meridian marketing had grown far beyond what anyone in my family suspected. What had started as a desperate attempt to pay my rent after being laid off from a corporate marketing position had evolved into something I'd never dared to dream. Within the first year, I'd secured 3 major clients whose retainer fees alone exceeded my old salary. By year 2, I was subcontracting work to freelancers across the country. By year 4, I'd quietly opened a second location in the state capital, operated under a different business name to avoid drawing attention. The breakthrough came during my 5th year in business, when a campaign I'd designed for a regional restaurant chain caught the attention of a national food conglomerate. They offered me a contract worth more in 1 year than most people earn in a decade. Instead of celebrating publicly or moving to a mansion, I did what my grandmother Elena had always taught me. I invested wisely and kept my mouth shut. Elena Vasquez had been my mother's mother, a fierce woman who'd immigrated from Colombia with nothing but determination and an unshakable belief that the best revenge against those who underestimate you is success they never see coming. She'd built a small empire of rental properties throughout Millbrook, always driving an old truck, and wearing clothes that suggested she was barely getting by. When she died during my college years, the family was shocked to discover she'd accumulated assets worth millions. "Never let them see your hand until you're ready to play it, mija," she'd told me during one of our Sunday afternoon walks along the Clearwater River. "People treat you differently when they know you have money. Sometimes it's better to let them show you who they really are first." I'd taken her advice to heart, perhaps too much so. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I was building a multi-million-dollar business, my family was treating me like the financial drain of the family. During holiday gatherings at my parents' Victorian home, Gabrielle would make subtle comments about my cute little hobby business and suggest I should consider getting a real job with benefits and stability. Marcus would offer unsolicited advice about career advancement, as if my choice to remain in Millbrook was somehow evidence of limited ambition. My parents, Richard and Patricia, had built their accounting practice from the ground up and were proud of their success, but they viewed my entrepreneurial efforts with a mixture of concern and condescension. They'd helped pay for my business degree at Millbrook State University, and I think they expected me to follow a more traditional path: corporate job, steady promotion, eventual marriage to someone who could provide security. The truth was, I already had more security than any of them realized, but Elena's wisdom had proven itself again and again. When Gabrielle's husband lost his job during the recession, she'd called me asking for a small loan to help with their mortgage payments. When Marcus needed help with his law school loans, he'd approached me with the air of someone doing me a favor by allowing me to contribute to his education. My parents had mentioned several times that they were proud of how their children looked out for each other, never realizing that the help had always flowed in one direction. I'd been happy to help, viewing it as an investment in family relationships. But I'd also been carefully documenting everything, not out of distrust initially, but because Elena had taught me that clear records prevent misunderstandings. As the years passed and the requests for help became more frequent, while expressions of gratitude became increasingly rare, I began to understand what Elena had really been trying to teach me. My personal life had been equally carefully curated. I dated occasionally, but never anyone from Millbrook's small social circles where news traveled faster than gossip at the monthly Chamber of Commerce meetings. My closest relationship was with Marisol Guerrero, who'd moved to Millbrook to teach at the elementary school and had no preconceptions about my family or their expectations. She was one of the few people who'd figured out that my business was far more successful than I let on, mainly because she'd occasionally helped with bookkeeping when I was swamped with client work. "Why do you live like this?" she'd asked me. One evening as we sat in my modest apartment, reviewing spreadsheets that showed revenue numbers that didn't match my lifestyle. "You could have anything you want. A house on Riverside Estates, a luxury car, vacations in Europe. Instead, you're living like a graduate student." I'd poured us both another glass of wine from a bottle that cost less than $10 and considered her question seriously. "Because once people know you have money, that's all they see," I'd finally answered. "Every conversation becomes about what you can do for them. Every relationship becomes transactional." My grandmother learned that the hard way. Marisol had nodded thoughtfully, but I could see she didn't entirely understand. How could she? She'd grown up in a family where love wasn't conditional on financial contribution, where support flowed naturally without calculation or expectation of return. The morning I found the lump during my routine self-exam, my first thought wasn't about mortality or treatment options. It was about whether this would finally force me to reveal the truth about my financial situation. I'd always imagined that if I ever needed serious help, I'd simply use my own resources without fanfare. But cancer, I was about to learn, isn't something you face alone, regardless of how much money you have. The biopsy results came back on a Thursday. Dr. Chen's call reached me while I was in my Main Street office, reviewing a campaign proposal for a client whose contract alone was worth more than my father's annual income. As he explained the staging, the treatment options, the timeline we were looking at, I found myself staring out the window at the ordinary street scene below. Mrs. Henderson walking her ancient terrier, the mailman making his afternoon rounds, teenagers from Millbrook High sharing sodas outside the corner market. Everything looked exactly the same, but I knew that my carefully constructed ordinary life was about to be destroyed. The question was whether my family's love for me would survive the destruction, or whether Elena's warnings about people's true natures would prove prophetic in ways I'd never wanted to test. As I prepared to make the phone calls that would change everything, I had no idea that within months I'd have my answer in the cruelest possible way, or that their betrayal would ultimately lead to a reckoning that would transform not just my life, but theirs as well. The ordinary world I'd built was about to crumble. But from its ashes, something far more powerful was going to rise. The phone. Calls I made that Thursday evening after Dr. Chen's diagnosis would haunt me for months to come, not because of the cancer itself, but because of what they revealed about the people I'd trusted most. I started with my parents, catching them just as they were finishing dinner at their Elm Ridge drive home. The silence that followed my announcement stretched so long I wondered if the connection had dropped. "Stage 3?" my mother finally whispered, her voice barely audible through the phone. Are you sure? Maybe you should get a second opinion." "Dr. Chen is one of the best oncologists in the region, Mom. I've already looked into it." I tried to keep my voice steady, professional even, as if I were delivering a business presentation rather than life-altering news to my parents. "The treatment plan is aggressive but promising. Surgery first, then chemotherapy and radiation. We're looking at about 8 to 10 months of intensive treatment." My father took the phone then, his accountant's mind immediately jumping to practical concerns. What about your insurance? Your business? Have you thought about what this means for your income? The questions felt like tiny paper cuts, each one technically reasonable, but somehow missing the emotional core of what I was sharing. I found myself reassuring them that everything would be manageable, that I had contingency plans, that they shouldn't worry about the logistics. Even as I spoke the words, I realized I was protecting them from my crisis, rather than seeking comfort. For myself, Gabrielle's reaction was even more jarring. I'd called her immediately after hanging up with our parents, catching her during her evening routine of reviewing property listings, while her husband watched television in their suburban home. "Oh my God, Vivienne, that's terrible," she said. But I could hear the clicking of her computer mouse continuing in the background. "I can't even imagine. How are you feeling? Are you scared?" I tried to explain what Dr. Chen had told me about treatment protocols and survival rates. But Gabrielle seemed distracted, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement while clearly multitasking. "This is just such awful timing," she said suddenly, and my heart lifted for a moment, thinking she was referring to my age or career stage. "Real estate season is about to kick into high gear, and I've got 3 major listings launching next week. Plus Emma has that dance recital, and Jake's baseball season is starting." The casual way she transformed my cancer diagnosis into an inconvenience for her schedule should have been my first warning. But I was still operating under the assumption that family meant something, that blood created bonds that couldn't be severed by mere inconvenience. Marcus proved equally tone-deaf when I reached him at his downtown law firm, where he was pulling, "Another late night trying to make partner?" "Jesus, Viv, that's really rough," he said, and I could hear him typing while we talked. "Look, I'm swamped right now with this merger case, but we should definitely talk about your medical directives and power of attorney stuff. You're going to want to get that squared away before you start treatment." "Marcus, I just told you I have cancer. Could you maybe stop working for 5 minutes? Sorry, you're right." The typing stopped, but his tone suggested he was granting me a favor rather than offering genuine support. "It's just that this case is huge for my career, and the timing, well, timing is never good for this kind of thing, right?" By the time I hung up with my brother, a hollow feeling had settled in my chest that had nothing to do with cancer cells, and everything to do with the growing realization that my family's first instinct wasn't to rally around me, but to calculate how my illness would impact their own lives. The contrast became stark when I called Marisol. "I'm coming over," she said, immediately, before I'd even finished explaining the diagnosis. "Right now. Have you eaten dinner? Are you okay being alone? Do you need me to bring anything?" "Marisol, you don't have to." "Shut up, Vivienne. I'm already grabbing my keys." She arrived 20 minutes later with a bag of groceries, a bottle of wine, and the kind of fierce determination that made her such an effective teacher. While she cooked pasta in my tiny kitchen, I found myself actually talking about my fears. Not the logistical concerns that seemed to preoccupy my family, but the raw terror of facing mortality at 34. "Your family's going to step up," she assured me as we sat on my couch with bowls of comfort food. "I know they seemed a little scattered tonight, but this is huge news. Give them time to process." I wanted to believe her. Despite years of subtle condescension and one-sided financial support, I still held on to the fundamental belief that when it truly mattered, family would be there. Cancer was surely the kind of crisis that would strip away petty concerns and reveal the love underneath. The first few weeks seemed to support Marisol's optimism. My parents accompanied me to the initial consultation with Dr. Chen, asking detailed questions about treatment options and prognosis. Gabrielle offered to drive me to appointments when her schedule allowed. Marcus researched the legal implications of extended medical leave and helped me draft documents protecting my business interests. But even during this honeymoon period of family support, cracks were already showing. My mother's anxiety manifested as an obsessive need to research alternative treatments forwarding me dozens of articles about dietary changes, experimental therapies, and holistic approaches that contradicted my oncologist's recommendations. When I gently explained that I was following Dr. Chen's evidence-based treatment plan, she became defensive. "I'm just trying to help," she said during one particularly tense conversation. "It's not like the doctors know everything. Mrs. Patterson from church says her cousin beat cancer using nothing but juice cleanses and positive thinking." My father's support came with a constant undercurrent of financial worry that felt more like criticism than concern. Despite my repeated assurances that I could handle the costs, he continued to bring up insurance deductibles, lost income, and the burden my treatment might place on the family's resources. "We're not wealthy people, sweetheart," he reminded me during one doctor's visit, his voice carrying the edge it got when clients questioned his billing practices. "We'll help however we can, but there are limits to what any family can absorb." The comment stung not just because it suggested I was already viewed as a financial drain, but because it revealed how little he understood about my actual situation. I had enough money in various investment accounts to cover every medical expense without touching my business assets. But Elena's voice in my head kept me from revealing that truth. Gabrielle's support proved the most fragile. Her initial offers to help with transportation and meal preparation quickly became contingent on her real estate schedule, which seemed to grow more demanding as my treatment progressed. She began arriving late to pick me up for appointments, often breathless with apologies about last-minute showings or client emergencies. "The spring market is absolutely insane this year," she explained one afternoon as we sat in Riverside Memorial's waiting room, her phone buzzing constantly with messages she couldn't ignore. "I hate that this is happening right when my business is taking off." Marcus maintained the most professional approach to my cancer, treating it like a legal matter requiring careful documentation and strategic planning. He helped me organize my medical records and insurance claims with the efficiency of a law clerk, but showed little interest in the emotional aspects of what I was experiencing. "You're handling this really well," he told me after one particularly brutal chemotherapy session that had left me nauseated and exhausted. "Very pragmatic approach. That's going to serve you well in the long run." I stared at him, wondering when my little brother had become someone who praised me for being pragmatic about my own potential death. The turning point came during my 8th week of treatment, when the side effects hit harder than anyone had predicted. The chemotherapy cocktail Dr. Chen had prescribed was aggressive by design, targeting the cancer cells with ruthless efficiency while leaving my healthy cells struggling to recover. I spent 3 days unable to keep food down, my energy depleted to the point where walking to the bathroom required careful planning. I called Gabrielle on a Tuesday morning, desperate for help with basic errands, groceries, pharmacy pickup, maybe just someone to sit with me for a few hours while the worst of the nausea passed. "I'm so sorry, Viv, but this is literally the worst possible week," she said, and I could hear her clicking through her computer calendar. "The Morrison listing goes live tomorrow, and I've got showings scheduled every day through the weekend. Can you maybe ask Marisol? Or what about one of those delivery services?" The suggestion that I should pay strangers to provide the support I'd expected from family felt like a physical blow, but it was her next comment that truly shattered something inside me. "You know, maybe it would be good for you to start building some independence with this stuff anyway. We can't drop everything. Every time you need something. Every time I needed something." As if my requests for help during cancer treatment were unreasonable impositions rather than the basic support any family member should expect during a life-threatening illness. That night, alone in my apartment with nothing but crackers and ginger, all within reach, I finally understood what Elena had been trying to teach me all those years ago. My family's love had always been conditional, based on what I could provide rather than who I was. The cancer hadn't changed them. It had simply revealed who they'd always been. But they had no idea who I'd become or what resources I had at my disposal to survive without them. Their abandonment was going to hurt more than any chemotherapy, but it was also going to liberate me from illusions I'd carried far too long. The real treatment was about to begin, and it had nothing to do with cancer cells. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday morning, 3 days after Gabrielle's crushing dismissal of my need for help, delivered by a courier service I didn't recognize. My name was written in elegant script across cream-colored paper that felt expensive between my fingers, the kind of stationery my grandmother Elena had always used for important correspondence. Inside was a letter dated 6 months before my cancer diagnosis, written in Elena's familiar handwriting, along with a small brass key attached to a red ribbon. "My dearest Vivienne," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then my instructions to my attorney have been followed, and you are facing a crisis that requires more than ordinary strength. I have watched you build something extraordinary while hiding your light under a bushel, just as I taught you. But there comes a time when hiding becomes a prison rather than protection." My hands trembled as I continued reading, whether from the lingering effects of chemotherapy or the shock of receiving a message from beyond the grave, I couldn't tell. "The key enclosed opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Millbrook, box number 847. Inside, you will find resources that I have been preparing for years, waiting for the moment when you would need to step fully into your power. But more importantly, you will find the truth about who you really are and what you are truly capable of becoming." Elena's words seemed to reach across time, speaking directly to the abandoned, exhausted woman I'd become over the past months. But it was her final paragraph that stopped my breath entirely. "The family that abandons you in darkness has no claim on you in the light. Sometimes, Misha, the greatest gift we can give those who underestimate us is the chance to see exactly what they threw away. The choice of how to use what you find will be yours alone. But remember, mercy without justice is just weakness, and justice without mercy is just revenge. Find the balance, and you will find your true strength." At the bottom of the letter, Elena had drawn a small symbol I remembered. From childhood, a phoenix rising from flames, which she'd always said represented the Vasquez family motto. From ashes, we rise stronger. I stared at the brass key, its weight somehow feeling significant despite its small size. Elena had died during my sophomore year of college, and in the chaos of grief and funeral arrangements, I'd never thought to ask about safety deposit boxes or hidden resources. My family had handled her estate with the efficient detachment they brought to most family matters, settling her affairs and distributing her modest visible assets without ever suggesting there might be more. But Elena had always been full of surprises. The drive to First National Bank felt surreal, like moving through a dream where ordinary actions carried extraordinary weight. I'd called Marisol to drive me, explaining only that I needed to handle some business related to my grandmother's estate. She didn't ask questions, simply arriving at my apartment with coffee and the kind of steady presence that had become my anchor during the worst days of treatment. "You sure you're up for this?" she asked as we pulled into the bank's parking lot. "You still look pretty wiped out from yesterday's session." I touched the brass key in my pocket, feeling its edges through the fabric. "I need to do this now. I don't think I can wait." The bank manager, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Hartwell who'd known Elena for decades, led us to the safety deposit box vault with the kind of hushed reverence reserved for sacred spaces. As she inserted her master key alongside Elena's brass key, I found myself holding my breath. "Your grandmother was quite a remarkable woman," Mrs. Hartwell said softly. "She came in every few months to check on this box, always asking about you. She was so proud of your business success, you know. Said you had inherited the Vasquez head for numbers and the stubborn streak that goes with it." The metal box slid out of its slot with a soft scraping sound. Inside, nestled in protective cloth, were documents, photographs, and a leather portfolio that looked like it contained something significant. "I'll give you privacy," Mrs. Hartwell said, leading us to a small viewing room. "Take all the time you need." With shaking hands, I opened the leather portfolio first. Inside were financial documents that made my eyes widen, investment accounts, property deeds, and business holdings I'd never known existed. Elena hadn't just been successful, she'd been extraordinarily wealthy, her modest lifestyle masking an empire built through decades of careful investing and strategic property acquisition. But it was the letter attached to these documents that truly stunned me. Vivienne, what you are looking at represents 30 years of preparation for this moment. Every property I bought, every investment I made, every dollar I saved was done with you in mind. I saw in you the same fire that built everything I achieved, but I also saw the gentle heart that I sometimes lacked. You are the heir I chose, not because of blood, but because of character. The financial documents showed assets worth over $15 million, all held in trusts and accounts that had been secretly transferring to my name since my 21st birthday. Real estate holdings throughout the state, investment portfolios, managed by the most prestigious firms, and business interests I'd never imagined. The family that raised you sees you as the poor relation, the one who needs their charity and guidance. Elena's letter continued. They have never understood that true wealth isn't displayed, it's accumulated. They measure success by the size of houses and the cost of cars, never realizing that real power comes from having choices they can't even imagine. Marisol, reading over my shoulder, let out a low whistle. Vivienne, this is incredible. You're not just wealthy, you're set for life, multiple times over. But Elena wasn't finished with her revelations. The next set of documents detailed a comprehensive plan she'd been developing for years, contingencies for various scenarios where I might need to reveal my true resources, medical emergencies, family crises, business opportunities. Each scenario came with detailed recommendations for how to maximize both the practical and psychological impact of stepping out of the shadows. Your cancer diagnosis was not something I could predict, Elena had written in a separate sealed envelope marked medical crisis. But I suspected that serious illness might be the test that revealed your family's true nature. If they have failed you, as I fear they might, then what you find here will give you the power to respond with more than just hurt feelings. Inside this envelope were business cards for the most exclusive medical facilities in the country. Contact. Information for private physicians who specialized in executive health care, and detailed instructions for arranging treatment that would make my current hospital care look primitive by comparison. But the most shocking discovery was a manila folder, labeled Alternative Resources, containing keys, addresses, and access codes for properties and assets I could use immediately if I needed to make dramatic changes to my situation. A penthouse apartment in the state capital, fully furnished and maintained by a property management company. A private medical facility in Switzerland that specialized in cutting-edge cancer treatment. Contact information for a private jet charter service that Elena had apparently used regularly for her own business travels. Financial accounts that could be accessed immediately for any emergency need. The choice is yours, Mija, Elena's final message read. You can continue living the modest life you've built, using these resources quietly to smooth your path without drawing attention. Or you can step fully into the power that is rightfully yours and show the world, especially those who have underestimated you, exactly who you really are. As I sat in that small bank room, surrounded by evidence of my grandmother's extraordinary foresight and love, I felt something shifting inside me. The hurt and abandonment of the past weeks didn't disappear, but it transformed into something sharper, more focused. Elena had given me more than money or property. She'd given me choices I'd never known I had, and the means to make decisions based on my own values rather than other people's limitations. For months, I'd been operating from a position of weakness, dependent on my family's unreliable support, and constrained by the financial concerns they kept projecting onto my situation. I'd been making treatment decisions based on insurance coverage rather than optimal care, accepting their emotional crumbs because I thought I needed their help to survive. But sitting in that bank vault, I realized that everything had changed. I wasn't a struggling small business owner fighting cancer with limited resources. I was a wealthy woman with access to the best medical care in the world, who had been playing a role so convincingly that even I had forgotten it was just a performance. The question now was what to do with this revelation, how to honor Elena's gift while staying true to my own principles, how to respond to my family's abandonment in a way that would teach rather than simply punish. Elena had warned against mercy without justice and justice without mercy. Finding that balance would require more strategic thinking than I'd ever attempted. But for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt like I had the tools and the power to craft a response worthy of the situation. My family thought they were dealing with desperate, dependent Vivienne who needed their begrudging help to survive. They had no idea they were about to meet the granddaughter of Elena Vasquez, a woman who had built an empire while letting everyone underestimate her. The real treatment was about to begin, and this time, I would be the one setting the terms. The days following my discovery at the bank passed in a strange haze of possibility and paralysis. Elena's resources offered me unlimited options, but the magnitude of those choices felt overwhelming in ways I hadn't anticipated. For someone who'd spent years carefully controlling every aspect of my public image, the prospect of revealing my true circumstances felt more terrifying than any cancer diagnosis. I found myself staring at the business cards Elena had left for exclusive medical facilities, my fingers tracing the embossed logos of institutions I'd only heard about in whispered conversations among the ultra-wealthy. The Meridian Cancer Institute in Manhattan, where celebrities and billionaires received treatment in spa-like settings with doctor-to-patient ratios that ensured immediate attention. The Alpine Medical Center in Switzerland, which combined cutting-edge oncology with holistic wellness approaches in a setting that resembled a luxury resort more than a hospital. But each time I reached for my phone to make an inquiry, something held me back. "You've been staring at those cards for 3 days," Marisol observed during one of her daily check-ins. She'd become increasingly worried about my withdrawn behavior since our trip to the bank, interpreting my contemplative silence as depression rather than strategic planning. "If you want to explore other treatment options, there's nothing stopping you. Your insurance doesn't have to be the limiting factor anymore." She was right, of course. Money was no longer an obstacle to anything I might want or need, but the psychological barriers felt insurmountable in ways that financial constraints never had. "It's not that simple," I said, setting down the card. "For a private medical concierge service that promised to coordinate world-class care within 48 hours. Once I make these calls, once I start using Elena's resources, there's no going back to being ordinary Vivienne from Main Street. Everything changes." "Maybe everything needs to change," Marisol replied gently. "Look what ordinary Vivienne's life has gotten you. A family that treats you like a burden during the worst crisis of your life. Medical care that's adequate but not optimal. Living in a cramped apartment when you could afford a mansion. What exactly are you trying to preserve?" Her question cut to the heart of my resistance. What was I trying to preserve? The comfortable fiction that I was just another small-town business owner? The illusion that my family's love wasn't conditional on their perception of my financial status? The safety of being underestimated rather than the vulnerability of being seen? The truth was that revealing Elena's inheritance would fundamentally alter every relationship in my life. My parents would shift from viewing me as the daughter who needed guidance to the one who could solve their financial problems. Gabrielle would stop seeing me as the little sister with the cute hobby business and start calculating what my newfound wealth could do for her real estate empire. Marcus would transform from the successful lawyer offering career advice to the brother seeking investment opportunities for his clients. But perhaps most terrifyingly, stepping into Elena's world would mean accepting that I truly was alone. As long as I maintained the fiction of needing my family's support, I could cling to the hope that their love might eventually overcome their selfishness. Once I revealed that I'd never needed them at all, their abandonment would become a choice, rather than a circumstance. The internal struggle intensified during my next chemotherapy session at Riverside Memorial. As I sat in the communal treatment room, surrounded by other cancer patients receiving their own poison drips, I couldn't help but notice the stark differences in our circumstances. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who'd become my informal treatment, Buddy was worried about whether her insurance would cover a scan her doctor had recommended. Jake Morrison, a 26-year-old teacher fighting lymphoma, had started a GoFundMe campaign to help with his mounting medical bills. Meanwhile, I had access to private treatment facilities where I could receive the same chemotherapy drugs, in suite-like rooms with personal chefs and concierge services. The guilt felt overwhelming. "You're very quiet today," observed Nina Rodriguez, the nurse practitioner who'd been managing my care since the beginning of treatment. She checked my Eveline with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen thousands of patients navigate this particular form of medical torture. "How are you feeling about your progress so far?" "Fine," I answered automatically, though fine was the last word I'd use to describe anything about my situation. "The side effects are manageable." Nina paused in her charting, studying my face, with the kind of attention that made me uncomfortable. "Vivienne, can I ask you something? And please feel free to tell me it's none of my business." I nodded, curious despite my reluctance to engage in personal conversation. In my experience, patients who are struggling financially tend to ask a lot of questions about costs, insurance coverage, payment plans. Patients who are comfortable usually focus on treatment efficacy, side effect management, that sort of thing. But you... She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "You ask questions like someone who's done extensive research on cutting-edge therapies, but you're receiving basic standard of care treatment. It's an interesting combination." Her observation was more perceptive than I'd given her credit for. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that if you have options you're not exploring, now might be the time to explore them. Cancer doesn't wait for us to resolve our psychological barriers to accepting help." Nina finished updating my chart and sat down in the visitor's chair beside my treatment recliner. I've seen too many patients limit their treatment options based on factors that had nothing to do with medical necessity. Her words echoed in my mind long after the session ended. That evening, alone in my apartment with Elena's documents spread across my dining table, I finally acknowledged the real source of my resistance. I was afraid. Afraid of my family's reaction when they discovered I'd been lying about my financial situation for years. Afraid of their anger when they realized I could have helped them more substantially but chose not to. Afraid of their guilt when they understood they'd abandoned someone who had never needed their charity in the first place. But mostly, I was afraid of my own power. Elena's inheritance wasn't just money, it was the ability to reshape my entire world according to my own vision. The penthouse apartment in the capital could become my primary residence within a week. The private medical care could begin immediately with a single phone call. The business opportunities could transform Meridian Marketing from a successful, small company into a regional empire. The weight of those possibilities felt crushing in ways that poverty never had. My phone rang, interrupting my spiral of analysis. Gabrielle's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity won out. "Vivienne, I'm so sorry to bother you," she began, her voice carrying the particular tone she used when asking for favors. "I know you're not feeling well, but I'm in a really tough spot, and I don't know who else to turn to." The familiar pattern of her neediness triggered something sharp in my chest. "What's wrong?" "It's this listing. The Morrison property on Riverside Estates. The buyer's financing fell through at the last minute, and now the sellers are threatening to pull out of our agreement and list with another agent. If I lose this sale, it's a $30,000 commission down the drain." She paused, letting the financial implications sink in before delivering her request. "I know this is terrible timing, but I was wondering if you might be able to help. Bridge the gap." Just temporarily, until I can find another buyer. Maybe 15,000? I could pay you back within 60 days, I promise. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. My sister, who'd been too busy to help me during cancer treatment, was asking me to loan her $15,000, an amount that represented less than an hour's worth of the interest Elena's investments generated daily. Gabrielle, I said, slowly, testing the words before I spoke them. Last week you told me you couldn't help with grocery shopping because you were too busy with work. Now you're asking me for $15,000. That's completely different, she replied quickly. This is business. This is my livelihood we're talking about. And it's not like I'm asking for charity. It's a loan with a guaranteed payback timeline. And my cancer treatment isn't my livelihood? My health isn't worth your time, but your commission is worth my money. The silence that followed was telling. When Gabrielle finally spoke, her voice had shifted to the defensive tone she'd used since childhood when caught in contradictions. Look, I understand you're going through a lot right now, but that doesn't mean the rest of the world stops. I have a family to support, a business to maintain. I can't drop everything every time you need something. There it was again. Every time I needed something. As if my requests for basic human support during cancer treatment were unreasonable impositions, while her request for substantial financial assistance was perfectly legitimate. In that moment, sitting in my modest apartment with Elena's empire of possibilities spread before me, I finally understood what my grandmother had been trying to teach me. The time for hiding was over. The time for accepting crumbs from people who should have been offering banquets was finished. The choice wasn't whether to use Elena's resources. The choice was how to use them in a way that honored both her wisdom and my own values. My family had shown me exactly who they were. Now it was time to show them who I had become. Gabrielle's request for money was the catalyst I'd needed, but translating that moment of clarity into action required expertise I didn't possess. Elena's resources were vast, but navigating them required the kind of discretion and strategic thinking that only came with experience in handling serious wealth. The business card I'd been avoiding for days suddenly felt necessary. Victoria Sterling, Private Client Services, with offices in Manhattan, London, and Zurich. Elena's notes indicated that Victoria had been managing the more delicate aspects of her financial empire for over a decade, specializing in what she called reputation management for the quietly wealthy. The phone call I made that Thursday morning would change everything. Ms. Thornfield. Victoria's voice carried the refined accent of someone educated at the finest institutions, but seasoned by years of managing complex human dynamics. I've been expecting your call for some time. Elena spoke of you often and left very specific instructions regarding your eventual contact. Her matter-of-fact acknowledgement of my situation was both comforting and unnerving. She knew I would call? Elena was remarkably prescient about family dynamics and crisis management. She predicted that you would initially resist using the resources she'd provided, and that some form of family betrayal would eventually force your hand. Her instructions were quite detailed about how to proceed once you were ready. Victoria's Manhattan office, located in a discreet building on the Upper East Side, felt like stepping into a different world entirely. The waiting area could have belonged to an exclusive private club, with museum-quality artwork and furniture that suggested serious money without ostentation. When Victoria emerged to greet me, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of understated elegance that spoke of genuine confidence, I immediately understood why Elena had trusted her with sensitive matters. Before we discuss specifics, Victoria said as we settled in her private office, I want you to understand something about your grandmother that she may never have shared directly. Elena didn't just accumulate wealth, she studied power. How to acquire it, how to wield it responsibly, and most importantly, how to use it to create positive change while protecting yourself from those who would exploit your generosity. She opened a leather portfolio that bore Elena's initials, withdrawing documents I'd never seen despite our comprehensive bank vault discovery. What you found at First National represents approximately 30% of Elena's total estate. The remainder has been held in trust structures and international accounts specifically designed to provide you with options your family could never anticipate or track. The numbers Victoria showed me were staggering. Elena's complete financial picture revealed assets approaching $50 million, diversified across real estate, private equity, government bonds, and what Victoria described as strategic business interests in companies I'd never heard of, but which apparently generated substantial passive income. Elena's methodology was simple but brilliant, Victoria continued, spreading out organizational charts that showed the interconnected network Elena had built. She invested in businesses and properties that generated steady cash flow while appreciating in value. But she structured everything through holding companies and trusts that made her actual wealth nearly impossible to calculate from the outside. But it was Elena's personal files that truly amazed me. Victoria showed me detailed dossiers on every member of my family, their financial situations, business dealings, personal relationships, and what Elena had observed about their character over the years. Your grandmother was particularly concerned about your sister's financial management, Victoria noted, indicating a folder marked Gabrielle Financial Assessment. Multiple failed business ventures, excessive lifestyle spending, and a pattern of viewing family members as financial resources rather than relationships to nurture. The file contained bank records, credit reports, and business documents that painted a picture of Gabrielle's finances far different from the successful real estate agent image she projected. Mounting debt, leveraged properties, and a series of poor investment decisions had left her far more financially vulnerable than anyone in the family suspected. Elena believed that Gabrielle's eventual financial desperation would make her particularly likely to view your illness as either an inconvenience or an opportunity, depending on her perception of your resources. Marcus's file was equally revealing. His prestigious law firm position came with substantial student loan debt, pressure to maintain an expensive lifestyle, and partnership requirements that included bringing in high net worth clients. Elena's notes suggested that his professional success was more fragile than it appeared. Your brother's career trajectory depends heavily on his ability to network with wealthy clients, Victoria explained. Elena suspected that discovering your true financial status might transform him from family member to business development opportunity. Even my parents' file contained surprises. Their accounting practice, while successful, had been struggling. With increased competition from larger firms and online services, they'd made several poor investment decisions over the years and were far more dependent on their current income than their comfortable lifestyle suggested. Elena's assessment was that your parents' financial insecurity made them likely to project their own limitations onto your situation, while simultaneously viewing any family member's wealth as a potential solution to their own problems. The accuracy of Elena's predictions about my family's behavior during my illness was unsettling, but also liberating. She hadn't just left me money. She'd left me a roadmap for understanding the psychology behind their abandonment. Now, Victoria said, closing the family files and opening a different section of her portfolio, let's discuss your options for moving forward. Elena provided 3 different strategic approaches depending on your goals and risk tolerance. The first option was what Victoria called silent power, using Elena's resources to dramatically improve my circumstances while maintaining the appearance of modest success. Private medical care arranged through intermediaries, a comfortable but not ostentatious lifestyle upgrade, and strategic business investments that would generate obvious success without revealing the true source of capital. This approach allows you to maintain existing relationships while protecting yourself from the complications that extreme wealth can create, Victoria explained. You become successful enough to command respect, but not wealthy enough to attract parasitic behavior. The second option was gradual revelation, a carefully planned process of revealing increasing levels of success over time, allowing my family to adjust their perceptions while maintaining plausible explanations for my improving circumstances. This method gives people time to process the change in your status, while providing multiple opportunities to observe their reactions and adjust your level of trust accordingly, Victoria noted. The third option was what Elena had labeled strategic shock, a complete revelation designed to fundamentally alter all existing relationships through the sheer magnitude of the disclosure. This approach is the most psychologically impactful, but also the riskiest, Victoria warned. It tends to reveal people's true character very quickly, but it also burns bridges that can never be rebuilt. As Victoria outlined each strategy, complete with timeline recommendations and potential consequences, I realized that Elena had essentially created a graduate-level course in wealth management and family psychology, customized specifically for my situation. Which approach did Elena recommend? I asked. Victoria smiled, and for the first time I saw a hint of the warmth that must have characterized her relationship with my grandmother. Elena said the choice would reveal as much about your character as their reactions would reveal about theirs. But she did leave one additional resource. She withdrew a sealed envelope marked, "For strategic guidance only." Inside was a single sheet of paper with Elena's handwriting. "Trust your instincts, mija. You have inherited more than money. You have inherited the wisdom to use it well. But remember, the goal is not to punish them for failing you. The goal is to free yourself from needing their approval and to build a life worthy of the strength you've discovered you possess." As I left Victoria's office that afternoon, my mind was spinning with possibilities. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt like I had a team of advisors who understood both the practical and emotional complexities of my situation. Victoria had agreed to serve as my primary strategist, with access to Elena's network of attorneys, accountants, and other professionals who specialized in discrete wealth management. But more importantly, I finally understood that Elena hadn't just left me money. She'd left me a comprehensive support system designed specifically for someone navigating the intersection of family dysfunction and sudden wealth. The question now wasn't whether I had the resources to respond to my family's abandonment. The question was which response would best honor both Elena's wisdom and my own emerging understanding of who I wanted to become. My family thought they were dealing with desperate, dependent Vivienne, who needed their grudging support to survive. They had no idea that I now had access to a level of strategic thinking and financial resources that would allow me to rewrite the rules of our entire relationship. The real question was, did I want to rewrite those rules, or was it time to start fresh with a completely different story? The decision crystallized during my 16th chemotherapy session as I sat in Riverside Memorial's communal treatment room, watching Mrs. Chen worry about whether Medicare would cover her upcoming scan. The contrast between her anxiety and my newfound options had become unbearable. Elena's resources weren't just sitting unused, they were being wasted while I clung to a facade that served no one. I made the call to Victoria from the hospital parking lot, my hands still shaky from the latest round of poison coursing through my veins. "I'm ready," I said without preamble when she answered. "Strategic shock. I want them to understand exactly what they threw away." Victoria's pause was brief but telling. "Are you certain? Once we implement this approach, there's no controlling the emotional fallout. Your family relationships will be permanently altered." "They've already been permanently altered," I replied, watching through the hospital window as Jake Morrison struggled to his car after his own treatment session, probably heading home to check his GoFundMe page. The difference is that now the change will be intentional, rather than something that happened to me. Within 48 hours, Victoria's team had orchestrated a transformation that felt like stepping into an alternate reality. My new medical team, led by Dr. Alexandra Petrov at the Manhattan Cancer Institute, reviewed my case files with the kind of attention I'd never experienced at Riverside Memorial. Instead of the assembly line approach of my previous care, Dr. Petrov spent 2 hours discussing not just treatment options, but quality-of-life considerations that no one had even mentioned before. Your current chemotherapy protocol is effective but unnecessarily harsh, she explained as we sat in her office, which resembled a luxury hotel suite more than a medical facility. We can achieve the same therapeutic results with targeted medications that will dramatically reduce your side effects. The drugs are newer and more expensive, but given your insurance situation, cost isn't a factor, I said, the words feeling strange but liberating. I want the best treatment available, regardless of expense. Dr. Petrov nodded as if such statements were routine in her practice. Then we'll design a protocol specifically for your case. Private treatment rooms, concierge nursing, and a support team that will coordinate everything from transportation to meal planning. You shouldn't have to think about anything except healing. The contrast with my Riverside Memorial experience was staggering. Instead of plastic chairs in a room full of other patients, I found myself in a private suite with a view of Central Park, attended by a dedicated nursing team that anticipated my needs before I could voice them. The chemotherapy drugs themselves were delivered through a port system that eliminated the painful IV insertions I'd endured for months. But the most dramatic change was psychological. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt like a person, receiving world-class medical care rather than a charity case grateful for whatever attention the overworked system could spare. Meanwhile, Victoria was implementing the other aspects of our strategic plan with military precision. The penthouse apartment Elena had maintained in the Meridian Tower became my primary residence within a week. The transition from my cramped Main Street loft to a 3,000-square-foot space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the state capitol felt surreal. Elena had furnished it with the kind of understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted wealth. Original artwork, handcrafted furniture, and technology seamlessly integrated into classical design. Elena used this space primarily for business meetings with high-net-worth clients, Victoria explained as she showed me through rooms that could have graced the pages of Architectural Digest. She believed that environment shapes perception, and that conducting business in impressive surroundings gave her psychological advantages in negotiations. The apartment came with a full-time staff that Elena had employed for years. Maria Santos, the house manager, greeted me with the warmth of someone who'd been anticipating my arrival. James Chen, the private chef, immediately began planning menus designed to support my recovery while accommodating the dietary restrictions that came with my new treatment protocol. Ms. Elena spoke of you often, Maria said as she showed me to the master suite, a space larger than my entire previous apartment. She said you had her mind for business, but a kinder heart. She was very proud of what you built on your own. But it was the transformation of my business that felt most empowering. Victoria connected me with Elena's network of high-net-worth contacts, leading to client opportunities that dwarfed anything I'd previously imagined. Within 2 weeks, Meridian Marketing had secured 3 new contracts worth more than my previous annual revenue combined. Elena always believed that your business acumen was underutilized because you were limiting your client base, Victoria explained as we reviewed the new contracts in the apartment's private office. Wealthy clients pay premium fees because they understand that expertise has value. You've been selling yourself short by focusing on small businesses that couldn't afford your true worth. The most significant contract came from Harrison Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate owned by one of Elena's former business partners. They needed a complete rebranding and marketing strategy for their expansion into international markets. Work that would normally require a team of consultants from major firms. Robert Harrison specifically requested you based on Elena's recommendation, Victoria noted. He's offering a retainer that would fund most marketing agencies for an entire year. As these changes unfolded, I maintained complete silence about them with my family. To them, I was still struggling Vivienne, receiving basic cancer treatment while trying to keep her small business afloat. They had no idea that their abandoned sister was rapidly becoming one of the most successful marketing consultants in the region. The challenge came in maintaining the facade during our increasingly rare interactions. When my mother called to check on my progress, expressing concern about my medical bills and lost income, I had to resist the urge to tell her that my new treatment facility charged more per session than most people earned in a month, and that my recent business contracts had already replaced my entire previous year's income. "Are you managing okay financially, sweetheart?" she asked during one particularly difficult conversation. "Your father and I have been talking, and we might be able to help with some of the medical expenses if things get too tight." The offer, which would have been meaningful months earlier, now felt almost insulting. They were offering to help with expenses that represented pocket change compared to my current resources, while having provided no emotional support when I actually needed it. "I'm managing fine, Mom," I replied, standing in my penthouse living room while watching my private car service arrive to take me to another premium medical appointment. "The treatment is going well, and the business is stable." It wasn't technically lying. The treatment was going exceptionally well with my new medical team, and describing Meridian Marketing's explosive growth as stable was certainly an understatement, rather than deception. The most challenging aspect of the transformation was the isolation it created. Marisol remained my closest confidant, but even she struggled to process the magnitude of the changes in my circumstances. "I'm happy for you, I really am," she said, during one of her visits to the penthouse, clearly overwhelmed by the space and what it represented. "But I have to admit, it's a little intimidating. This apartment is bigger than the entire school where I work." Her discomfort was understandable, but also disappointing. I'd hoped that my oldest friend would celebrate my improved circumstances, but instead she seemed to view them as a barrier between us. "I'm still the same person, Marisol," I assured her as we sat in the apartment's formal living room, a space that did feel rather ridiculous for casual conversation. "The only thing that's changed is that I don't have to worry about money or medical care anymore." "But that's everything," she replied quietly. "Those worries were what we shared. Now you're living in a world I can't even imagine, getting medical treatment that costs more than I make in a year, running a business with clients I've never heard of. How is that the same person?" Her question haunted me long after she left. Was I still the same person? Or had Elena's transformation changed something fundamental about who I was? The answer came during my next appointment with Dr. Petrov, when she delivered news that would have been devastating in my old circumstances, but felt manageable in my new ones. "The latest scans show some concerning developments," she said, her voice carrying the practiced calm of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news to patients who had options. "We're going to need to adjust your treatment protocol significantly. There's an experimental therapy available through a clinical trial in Switzerland that shows remarkable promise for cases like yours. In my previous life, such news would have meant frantic calls to insurance companies, desperate attempts to navigate bureaucracy, and probably settling for whatever treatment Riverside Memorial could provide. Now, it meant a conversation about scheduling and logistics. How quickly can we arrange it?" I asked. "The Swiss facility can begin treatment within 2 weeks if you're interested. It would mean temporarily relocating to Zurich, but the protocol they're offering represents the absolute cutting edge of cancer therapy." As I sat in Dr. Petrov's office, discussing international treatment options as casually as most people plan vacations, I realized that Elena's transformation hadn't changed who I was. It had revealed who I'd always been beneath the limitations I'd accepted. I was someone who deserved the best medical care available, someone whose business expertise had real value in sophisticated markets, someone who didn't need to accept crumbs from people too self-absorbed to offer proper support during a crisis. The girl who'd lived above the bakery on Main Street hadn't disappeared. She'd simply stopped hiding behind artificial constraints and started living up to her actual potential. My family still had no idea what they'd abandoned, but they were about to find out. The revelation happened by accident, which somehow made it more devastating than any strategic disclosure I might have planned. I was returning from my consultation at the Swiss treatment facility in Zurich, where, Dr. Heinrich Weber had confirmed that their experimental protocol could potentially eliminate my cancer entirely within 6 months. The private jet, Elena's estate maintained, touched down at Millbrook Regional Airport on a crisp October afternoon, and I was feeling more hopeful about my medical future than I had since diagnosis. Marcus was the one who saw everything. He'd been driving past the airport on his way to a client meeting when he spotted the sleek Gulfstream G650 taxiing toward the private terminal. As he told me later, his lawyer's curiosity had been piqued by the unusual sight of such an expensive aircraft at our small regional airport. He'd pulled over to watch, probably thinking he might learn about a potential high-net-worth client moving to the area. Instead, he watched his supposedly struggling cancer patient sister emerge from the jet, followed by a woman in an expensive suit who treated me with the deference reserved for very important clients. Marcus called me that evening, his voice carefully controlled in the way that meant he was processing information that didn't fit his worldview. "Vivienne, I saw something interesting at the airport today," he began, and my stomach immediately dropped. "A private jet that looked like it cost more than most people's houses. Imagine my surprise when I saw you getting off it. I'd been dreading this moment while simultaneously anticipating it. The careful facade I'd maintained for months was about to crumble, and I found myself oddly relieved." "Where were you coming from?" Marcus continued, his cross-examination instincts fully engaged. "Because last I checked, cancer patients receiving charity care don't typically travel on private aircraft that cost $50,000 per flight hour." "Switzerland," I said simply, deciding that partial truth was better than outright deception. "I was consulting with specialists about treatment options." The silence that followed was deafening. When Marcus finally spoke again, his voice had shifted from curious to accusatory. "Switzerland. For medical treatment. On a private jet." He paused, clearly calculating the implications. "Vivienne, what the hell is going on? Who are you really?" The question hit deeper than he probably intended. Who was I really? The struggling small business owner my family had always known? The secretly wealthy granddaughter of Elena Vasquez? The cancer patient who'd been abandoned by the people who claimed to love her? Or someone entirely different? Someone I was still discovering? "I think we need to have a family meeting," I said finally. "There are things you don't know. Things I should have shared a long time ago." "You think?" Marcus's lawyer training was fully activated now. "Vivienne, if you've been lying about your financial situation while accepting help and sympathy from the family, that's not just deception, it's fraud. Emotional fraud, if nothing else." His accusation stung because it contained enough truth to hurt. I had accepted their sympathy while hiding my true circumstances, but I'd also endured their abandonment while they were completely unaware of what they were actually throwing away. The family meeting convened 2 days later at my parents' house on Elm Ridge Drive. I arrived in the Tesla Model S that Victoria had suggested as a subtle indicator of success without being ostentatiously luxurious. Even that modest display of wealth seemed to unsettle them as I pulled into their driveway. The living room felt smaller than I remembered, or perhaps my perspective had changed after months of living in spaces designed for people with serious money. My parents sat together on their familiar couch, while Gabrielle claimed the armchair she'd always preferred, and Marcus paced near the window like a prosecutor preparing his opening statement. "Before anyone says anything," I began, settling into the remaining chair, "I want you to know that I understand you're angry. You have a right to be angry, but you also don't have all the information." "Then give us the information," Gabrielle demanded, her real estate agent mask firmly in place. "Explain to us how our struggling sister who needed rides to chemotherapy appointments suddenly has access to private jets and Swiss medical facilities." I looked around the room at the faces of people who'd raised me, loved me, and ultimately abandoned me when I needed them most. The words I'd been rehearsing seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what I was about to reveal. "Grandmother Elena left me more than any of you knew," I said simply. "Significantly more." "How much more?" my father asked. His accountant's instincts immediately focused on numbers. Approximately $50 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking the seconds. My mother's face went pale. Gabrielle's mouth actually fell open. Marcus stopped pacing and stared at me as if I'd announced I was an alien from another planet. 50 million, my father repeated slowly, as if saying the number might make it make sense. Dollars, I confirmed. That's impossible, Gabrielle said quickly, her voice rising. Elena lived in a modest house and drove that old pickup truck until the day she died. She was comfortable, sure, but 50 million? You're lying. I withdrew my phone and pulled up the portfolio summary Victoria had prepared for exactly this moment. The screen showed asset valuations, investment accounts, and property holdings that told the story of Elena's extraordinary accumulation of wealth. She was very good at hiding her success, I said, passing the phone to my father, who began scrolling through the documents with the fascination of someone who spent his life working with numbers but had never seen anything approaching the scale. Jesus Christ, he whispered, handing the phone to my mother. Vivienne, this is generational wealth. This is enough money to change everything for all of us. And there it was, the shift I'd been expecting and dreading. Within seconds of learning about Elena's inheritance, my father had moved, from shock to calculation, already thinking about how my newfound wealth could benefit the family. When did you find out about this? Marcus asked, his cross-examination mode fully engaged. 3 months ago, right after you all made it clear that helping me through cancer treatment was too much of a burden for your busy lives. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. Gabrielle's face flushed red. Marcus began pacing again, faster this time. That's not fair, my mother said quietly. We were helping. We were doing our best to support you. Were you? I stood up, the weeks of suppressed anger finally finding their voice. Because what I remember is Gabrielle telling me she was too busy with real estate showings to help with grocery shopping while I was too sick to drive. I remember Marcus treating my cancer like a legal filing that needed to be managed efficiently. I remember Dad constantly worrying about the financial burden I was placing on the family. But we didn't know, Gabrielle started. Exactly, I interrupted. You didn't know I had money, so you felt justified in treating me like an inconvenience. The only thing my wealth should have changed was your understanding of what I could contribute to you. It shouldn't have changed whether you showed up for someone you claimed to love during the worst crisis of their life. The truth was laid bare now, and it was uglier than any of us had wanted to acknowledge. Their support had been conditional on their perception of my circumstances. When they believed I was struggling financially, helping me felt like charity. They couldn't afford. When they thought I might need long-term assistance, I became a burden they wanted to transfer to someone else. So what now? Marcus asked, always focused on practical next steps. What happens with this information? I looked around the room at my family, people who'd failed me when I needed them most, but who were also the only family I had. Elena's wisdom echoed in my memory. Mercy without justice is just weakness, and justice without mercy is just revenge. Now you understand what you chose to abandon, I said quietly. And I understand what your love was really worth. My mother began to cry, the kind of silent tears that spoke to genuine remorse. My father stared at his hands, probably calculating how much money they'd lost access to through their poor treatment of me. Gabrielle looked like she was mentally reviewing every conversation we'd had over the past months, recognizing how differently she might have behaved if she'd known the truth. But it was Marcus who surprised me with his response. You're right, he said simply, stopping his pacing to face me directly. We failed you. Not because we didn't know you were wealthy, but because we forgot that you were family. Money should never have been part of the equation. His acknowledgement was more than I'd expected, and more meaningful than any apology focused on what they'd lost by abandoning me. The question now, I continued, is whether any of us wants to try to rebuild relationships based on who we actually are rather than who we thought we were. Because the woman who needed rides to chemotherapy appointments doesn't exist anymore. She never really existed. I just let you believe she did. Who are you then? My mother asked through her tears. I considered the question seriously, looking around the modest living room that had shaped so much of my early understanding of success and family. I'm Elena Vasquez's granddaughter, I said finally. Someone who built something significant while letting everyone underestimate her. Someone who survived cancer and family abandonment and discovered she was stronger than either of those challenges. Someone who has choices you can't even imagine. The room fell silent again as they processed not just the money, but the transformation it represented. I was no longer the daughter and sister they thought they knew. I was someone new, someone powerful, someone who could afford to be selective about who deserved access to her life. The question now was whether they would prove worthy of that access, or whether Elena's $50 million inheritance would simply be the price I paid to learn who my family really was. The days following the family revelation unfolded with the kind of calculated desperation I'd only seen in corporate boardrooms when companies faced existential threats. My family, having digested the magnitude of what they'd lost access to, began implementing damage control strategies that revealed more about their character than months of casual interaction ever could. It started with my mother's daily phone calls, each one a carefully orchestrated symphony of maternal concern, designed to rebuild intimacy we'd never actually shared. Sweetheart, I've been thinking about what you said, and you're absolutely right, she began during one particularly transparent attempt at reconciliation. We should have been more supportive during your treatment. I want to make up for that. Now, why don't you come stay with us for a few weeks? I could take care of you properly, cook all your favorite meals, help you recover. The invitation to return to my childhood bedroom and be mothered by someone who'd considered my cancer treatment an inconvenience just months earlier would have been laughable if it weren't so calculating. My mother, who'd forwarded alternative medicine articles instead of offering emotional support, was now positioning herself as the nurturing caregiver she'd never actually been. That's very kind, Mom, but I'm quite comfortable in my current living situation, I replied from my penthouse apartment, where Maria had just served lunch on china that cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage payment. Oh, right. Your new apartment, my mother said, her voice carefully neutral. I'd love to see it sometime. It must be quite a change from Main Street. The fishing expedition was transparent, but also sad. She was trying to gauge the extent of my lifestyle transformation while positioning herself for inclusion in my new circumstances. Gabrielle's approach was more direct and infinitely more calculated. She arrived at my apartment unannounced 3 days after the family meeting, armed with a designer gift bag and the kind of smile she typically reserved for clients considering premium property purchases. I brought you something, she announced, presenting a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than the $15,000 she'd asked to borrow weeks earlier, to celebrate your recovery progress and your new opportunities. I accepted the champagne with the same polite distance I'd learned from watching Elena navigate social obligations with people whose motives were suspect. That's thoughtful, Gabrielle. Though I should mention that alcohol interacts poorly with my current medication protocol. Of course, she said quickly, settling onto my Italian leather sofa with the proprietary air of someone claiming territory. I wasn't thinking about the medical considerations. It's just that I'm so excited about your good news, both the health improvements and the other developments. She gestured vaguely around the apartment, her real estate agent's eye clearly cataloging the value of everything she could see. Vivienne, I owe you an enormous apology, she continued, shifting into what I recognized as her serious sales presentation mode. I was so stressed about my own business that I completely failed to prioritize what really mattered, your health and our relationship. I want to make that right. How do you propose to do that? I asked, genuinely curious about what kind of relationship repair she thought was possible. Well, I've been thinking about ways we could spend more time together. Maybe travel. I know, you're probably going to Switzerland again for treatment. I could come with you, help coordinate care, be the support system you deserved all along. The offer to accompany me to exclusive European medical facilities, where her presence would give her access to wealthy patient networks and luxury accommodations, was so transparently self-serving that I had to admire its audacity. I've also been thinking about business opportunities, she continued, apparently interpreting my silence as encouragement. With your new connections and my real estate expertise, we could probably identify some incredible investment properties, high-end developments, luxury commercial spaces, maybe even international real estate ventures. There it was. Gabrielle had spent exactly 3 days calculating how to monetize her relationship with her newly wealthy sister, and she'd arrived with a comprehensive business proposal disguised as family reconciliation. But it was Marcus who proved most sophisticated in his manipulation attempts. He requested a formal meeting at my apartment, arriving with legal documents and the kind of professional presentation materials he typically used for corporate clients. His approach was to frame my family's abandonment as a misunderstanding that could be resolved through proper legal and financial structures. I've drafted some preliminary documents that might help clarify everyone's expectations moving forward, he announced, spreading contracts across my dining room table with the confidence of someone who believed legal language could repair emotional damage. What kind of documents? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Family limited partnerships, trust structures, estate planning instruments that would formalize how Elena's inheritance could benefit the entire family while protecting your primary interests, he explained with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a way to turn his sister's wealth into his professional opportunity. The tax advantages alone could save hundreds of thousands annually, he continued, launching into a presentation about wealth preservation strategies that would coincidentally require ongoing legal services from his firm. But his most calculated move was the emotional manipulation he'd woven throughout his legal recommendations. I've also included provisions for family medical emergencies, he said, indicating a section of documents that outlined how my resources could be accessed to help family members facing health crises. After watching what you went through, I realized how vulnerable we all are to unexpected medical expenses. The implication was clear. If I didn't establish these legal structures, I would be abandoning my family the same way they'd abandoned me. It was manipulation of the highest order, using my own traumatic experience to guilt me into funding their future security. What made their behavior particularly galling was how quickly they'd moved from denying their abandonment to explaining it away as misunderstanding, then immediately positioning themselves to benefit from the wealth they'd previously been unaware of. None of them addressed the fundamental issue. Their love and support had been conditional on their perception of my financial status. They weren't apologizing for treating me poorly during cancer treatment. They were apologizing for not knowing I was wealthy when they treated me poorly. The final straw came during a family dinner at an expensive restaurant Gabrielle had selected to celebrate our fresh start. The evening was a masterclass in calculated manipulation, with each family member playing a carefully rehearsed role designed to reestablish intimacy and obligation. My father opened the performance with a speech about family legacy and the importance of sticking together during challenging times. My mother followed with tearful reminiscences about my childhood that conveniently overlooked years of emotional distance. Gabrielle contributed enthusiastic plans for shared experiences that would happen to require significant financial resources. Marcus concluded with detailed explanations of how proper estate planning could ensure the family's security for generations. Throughout the dinner, they spoke about Elena's inheritance as if it were a family windfall rather than a personal bequest, specifically intended for me. They discussed our opportunities and family investments, and shared responsibilities, with the casual assumption that wealth created obligations I had no choice but to accept. But it was my mother's closing comment that revealed the full extent of their self-deception. "I'm just so grateful that Elena thought ahead like this," she said, raising her wine glass in a toast. She always understood that family wealth should benefit everyone, not just one person. It's like she planned this to bring us all closer together. The revisionist history was breathtaking. Elena, who'd spent years documenting my family's conditional love and predicting their reaction to crisis, was being reimagined as someone who'd intended her inheritance to benefit the same people she'd warned me about. That night, alone in my penthouse apartment, I finally understood the true scope of what Elena had given me. It wasn't just financial resources or business opportunities or access to premium medical care. It was the ability to see clearly who people really were when they thought something valuable was at stake. My family hadn't learned anything from my revelation about their abandonment during cancer treatment. They'd simply recalibrated their approach to extract maximum benefit from my changed circumstances. Their apologies weren't expressions of genuine remorse. They were strategic investments in future access to my wealth. Elena had predicted this exact scenario in her notes, describing it as the most dangerous phase of wealth revelation. When people who'd shown their true character during crisis attempted to rewrite history to regain access to resources they'd lost through their own behavior. The question now wasn't whether my family deserved forgiveness for abandoning me during cancer treatment. The question was whether they deserved access to a future they were clearly determined to exploit, regardless of what I needed or wanted. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt truly alone. But Elena had prepared me for this too, leaving notes about the difference between isolation and independence, between loneliness and freedom. My family had shown me who they were when they thought I needed them. Now they were showing me who they were when they thought they needed me. The consistency was devastating, but it was also clarifying. It was time to stop hoping they might change and start deciding what kind of future I wanted to build without them. The letter from Dr. Weber arrived on a Tuesday morning that would change everything, though I didn't know it yet. I was sitting in my penthouse office, reviewing the latest expansion proposals for Meridian Marketing, when Maria brought me the overnight delivery from Switzerland with the kind of reverent handling she reserved for important correspondence. Inside, the elegant envelope was news that should have been cause for celebration. The experimental treatment protocol had worked beyond their most optimistic projections. My latest scans showed no detectable cancer cells anywhere in my body. I was, according to Dr. Weber's carefully medical language, completely cured. But instead of the relief and joy I'd expected to feel, I found myself staring out at the city skyline feeling more hollow than triumphant. The cancer that had defined the last year of my life was gone, but so was the clarity of purpose it had provided. Fighting for survival had given every decision weight and meaning. Now, faced with unlimited time and unlimited resources, I felt paradoxically lost. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent months being abandoned by my family during what I thought might be my final year, only to discover I was going to live and didn't want them in that future anyway. I called Victoria immediately, needing someone who understood the complex emotions that came with sudden, complete life transformation. "Congratulations," she said warmly after I'd shared Dr. Weber's report. "Elena would be so proud, not just of your recovery, but of how you've handled everything this year has thrown at you." "I don't feel proud," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. "I feel empty, like I've won a game I'm not sure I wanted to play." Victoria's pause was thoughtful rather than judgmental. "What you're experiencing is completely normal. Survivors often struggle with what comes after survival. You've spent a year in crisis mode, making decisions based on immediate necessity. Now you have to figure out what you actually want rather than what you need." Her words highlighted something I'd been avoiding. I had no idea what I wanted for my future. The cancer fight had been all-consuming, and the family drama had provided a clear antagonist to oppose. But now, facing unlimited possibility with unlimited resources, the choices felt overwhelming rather than liberating. Elena left you one more thing, Victoria continued. I was instructed not to share it unless you reached this exact point, medically cleared and emotionally adrift. She called it her crossroads gift. 3 hours later, Victoria arrived at my apartment with a leather portfolio I'd never seen before. Inside were documents that revealed the final layer of Elena's extraordinary planning, detailed proposals for philanthropic ventures, business acquisitions, and social impact projects that would put my wealth to work in ways that honored her values, while allowing me to discover my own. But it was Elena's final letter that truly stopped my breath. My dearest Vivienne, she'd written in the flowing script I missed more than I'd realized. If you're reading this, then you have survived both cancer and the revelation of your family's true nature. I imagine you're feeling lost, wondering what to do with a future you'd stopped believing you'd have. Her accuracy was unsettling, as if she'd known exactly what emotional state I'd be in at this precise moment. The money was never the real gift. Mija. The real gift was the choice it provides. You can now live according to your own values rather than other people's limitations. But choice without purpose is just expensive aimlessness. Elena had included detailed plans for initiatives I could pursue. A foundation supporting cancer research and patient advocacy, investment funds focused on women-owned businesses, scholarship programs for first-generation college students, even a network of safe houses for people fleeing family abuse. Each proposal was meticulously researched and completely funded, requiring only my decision to implement. These are suggestions, not obligations, Elena had written. The question isn't what I think you should do with the inheritance. The question is what kind of person you want to become when you're no longer defined by scarcity or crisis. As I reviewed Elena's proposals that evening, a profound realization crystallized. My family's abandonment and subsequent manipulation attempts had been painful, but they'd also been clarifying. They'd forced me to confront fundamental questions about love, loyalty, and self-worth that I might have avoided indefinitely under different circumstances. The woman who'd lived above the bakery on Main Street, accepting her family's conditional love and hiding her business success, had been playing a role that felt safe but ultimately false. The cancer diagnosis had stripped away that safety, revealing both the family's limitations and my own strength. Elena's inheritance had provided resources, but the real transformation had come from learning to value myself appropriately. I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to give my family one final opportunity to demonstrate who they truly were. Not because I believed they would change, but because I needed to close this chapter of my life with complete certainty about my choices. The plan I developed over the next several days was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. I would offer each family member exactly what they'd shown they valued most: access to my resources in exchange for clearly defined conditions that would test their character definitively. For my parents, I would propose funding their retirement and securing their financial future, but only if they could acknowledge the specific ways they'd failed me during treatment and commit to behavioral changes that demonstrated genuine remorse. For Gabrielle, I would offer to invest in her real estate business and provide access to high-net-worth clients, but only if she could articulate what she'd learned about prioritizing family relationships over business opportunities during crisis. For Marcus, I would provide the high-net-worth client connections his career needed while funding his path to partnership, but only if he could demonstrate that he valued our relationship for reasons beyond professional advancement. Each offer would come with specific conditions designed to reveal whether they were capable of genuine change or simply better manipulation. The amounts involved would be substantial enough to represent real-life improvements, but the behavioral requirements would demand emotional growth they'd shown no capacity for developing. I knew with virtual certainty that they would fail these tests. Their recent behavior had demonstrated that they viewed my wealth as a family resource to be accessed rather than a personal asset I might choose to share. They'd shown no genuine remorse for abandoning me during cancer treatment, only strategic regret for missing out on financial opportunities. But offering these tests would serve multiple purposes. It would provide definitive proof of their character. For my own closure, demonstrate my willingness to give them every possible chance at redemption, and establish clear moral authority for whatever final decisions I made about our relationships. Victoria reviewed my proposal with the analytical precision of someone who'd helped many wealthy clients navigate complex family dynamics. This is sophisticated psychological testing disguised as generous financial offers, she observed. Elena would appreciate the strategy. You're essentially creating controlled conditions to observe their authentic behavior when they think something valuable is at stake. Exactly. If they prove capable of genuine change and appropriate remorse, then we'll have a foundation for rebuilding our relationships. If they demonstrate that their recent behavior represents their authentic character, rather than temporary stress reactions, then I'll have the closure I need to move forward without them. And if they fail the tests? I considered the question seriously, looking out at the city lights that no longer felt like distant possibilities, but like a world full of opportunities I could pursue without constraint. Then I'll implement Elena's philanthropic proposals and build a life focused on people who understand that wealth is a tool for creating positive change rather than an entitlement to exploit. The conversation with Victoria helped me realize that the family tests weren't really about them at all. They were about me proving to myself that I'd exhausted every reasonable opportunity for reconciliation before choosing independence over continued disappointment. Elena's final letter had included one more piece of wisdom. Freedom isn't just about having choices, Mija. It's about having the courage to make choices that honor your authentic self rather than other people's expectations. I was about to discover whether my family valued our relationships enough to meet me in authenticity, or whether they would choose to remain trapped in the patterns of conditional love and strategic manipulation that had defined our interactions for so long. Either way, I would finally be free to build the future Elena had envisioned for me, one based on my own values rather than other people's limitations, funded by her extraordinary gift but guided by the strength I'd discovered within myself. The tests would begin tomorrow. By the end of the week, I would know definitively whether my family deserved access to that future, or whether it was time to close this chapter of my life and begin writing an entirely new story. I scheduled individual meetings with each family member over the course of a week, timing them to allow maximum reflection between sessions while preventing them from coordinating their responses. The formal invitations, delivered by courier on my personal letterhead, requested their presence at my penthouse apartment to discuss opportunities for our future relationship. My father came first, arriving punctually at 2 o'clock on Monday. Afternoon with the nervous energy of someone who sensed significant opportunity but wasn't certain how to secure it. I greeted him in my apartment's formal sitting room, where Victoria had arranged the documents for his specific proposal on an antique mahogany table that had belonged to Elena. "Dad, thank you for coming," I began, gesturing for him to sit across from me in one of the leather chairs that cost more than his monthly income. "I've been thinking carefully about our conversation last week, and I want to discuss something important with you and Mom." His eyes immediately shifted to the documents on the table, probably calculating potential financial implications before I'd even begun speaking. "I'm prepared to establish a trust fund that would provide for your and Mom's complete retirement security," I continued, watching his face carefully. $5 million invested conservatively to generate annual income that would allow you to maintain your current lifestyle indefinitely without any financial concerns. My father's sharp intake of breath was audible. $5 million, he repeated, slowly, as if testing the weight of the words. $5 million, I confirmed. But the offer comes with specific conditions that are non-negotiable. I handed him a document Victoria had prepared, outlining the behavioral requirements that would govern access to the funds. His enthusiasm dimmed noticeably as he read through the stipulations. "You're requiring written acknowledgement of specific failures during my cancer treatment," he said, his accountant's precision focusing on the most uncomfortable requirement, "and ongoing therapy sessions to address family communication patterns. I'm requiring honesty about what happened and genuine commitment to change," I replied evenly. The acknowledgement needs to be specific because generic apologies don't demonstrate actual understanding of harm caused. The therapy requirement ensures that any changes will be sustainable rather than performative. My father set down the document, his expression shifting from excitement to calculation to something approaching resentment. "This feels like you're trying to punish us financially for mistakes we made during an impossible situation," he said finally. "Your mother and I did our best under difficult circumstances. We're not perfect, but expecting us to grovel for financial support seems vindictive." "I'm not expecting you to grovel," I replied calmly. "I'm expecting you to demonstrate the same level of accountability you'd require from a client who'd mismanaged their responsibilities to their family." The parallel to his professional standards clearly stung. That's completely different. Business relationships have clear contractual obligations, and family relationships have moral obligations, I countered, "which you violated when you treated my cancer as a financial burden rather than a health crisis requiring emotional support." The conversation deteriorated rapidly from there. My father's initial excitement about the financial opportunity transformed into defensive anger when he realized the money came with requirements for genuine change rather than simple gratitude. He ultimately left without signing anything, muttering about manipulation disguised as generosity. Gabrielle's meeting on Wednesday followed a depressingly similar pattern. Her proposal involved a $2 million investment in her real estate business, along with introductions to my new network of high-net-worth contacts. The conditions required her to demonstrate that she'd learned to prioritize family relationships over business opportunities during crisis situations. "You want me to sign something saying I'll never put work before family emergencies," she said, reading through the behavioral contract with growing irritation. "But that's completely unrealistic, Vivienne. Business opportunities don't wait for convenient timing. Cancer treatment doesn't wait for convenient timing either," I replied. "But you found ways to make my medical appointments inconvenient when they conflicted with your showing schedule." "That was different. You had other options. For transportation, these real estate deals were once-in-a-lifetime opportunities." Her inability to see the fundamental value difference between business commissions and family support during life-threatening illness was exactly what I'd expected, but still disappointing to witness firsthand. The conversation grew heated when she realized the contract also required her to contribute a percentage of her profits to cancer research organizations, specifically to fund transportation services for patients whose families weren't available to help. "Now you're trying to control how I spend money I haven't even earned yet," she accused. "This isn't an investment offer. It's an attempt to control my entire life. It's an attempt to ensure that benefiting from my resources requires contributing to solutions for problems you helped create," I corrected. "If you can't see the value in helping other cancer patients who might not have family support, then you haven't learned anything from our experience." Gabrielle stormed out after declaring the conditions financially abusive and threatening to consult an attorney about whether my offer constituted some form of emotional blackmail. Marcus's meeting on Friday proved the most sophisticated in its manipulation attempts. He arrived with his own legal documents, having apparently anticipated that my offer would include behavioral requirements he might want to modify. "I've prepared some alternative language for the conditions you've outlined," he announced, spreading his revised contracts across my dining table with the confidence of someone accustomed to negotiating favorable terms. His version maintained the financial benefits, $3 million for business development and client networking access, while substantially weakening the accountability requirements. Where my contract required specific acknowledgement of his failure to provide emotional support during my treatment, his version contained generic language about improving family communication. These revisions maintain the spirit of your requirements, while creating more realistic expectations for behavioral change, he explained with the practiced persuasion of someone arguing before a judge. Marcus, I said, reviewing his modifications with growing amazement at their audacity, you're trying to negotiate the terms of your own accountability for abandoning me during cancer treatment. I'm trying to create sustainable conditions for a positive, ongoing relationship, he corrected smoothly. Your original terms are designed for failure rather than success. They're designed to ensure that access to my resources requires genuine change rather than performative compliance. The fundamental disconnect in our perspectives became clear as our discussion continued. Marcus viewed my conditions as unreasonable obstacles to accessing financial opportunities he believed he deserved based on family relationship. I viewed them as minimal requirements for demonstrating that he'd learned anything from the consequences of treating family members as inconveniences during health crises. When I refused to accept his modified terms, Marcus shifted tactics to direct emotional manipulation. You're using your wealth to control people's behavior, he accused. Elena never would have approved of financial coercion within the family. Elena documented your exact behavior during family crises for years before she died, I replied, retrieving the files Victoria had prepared with Elena's observations about each family member. She predicted that you would view accountability requirements as coercion rather than opportunities for growth. Reading Elena's assessments of his character, written years before my cancer diagnosis, but accurately predicting his reactions to family crisis, clearly shook Marcus's confidence in his manipulation strategy. But his final response revealed everything I needed to know about his authentic character. Fine, he said, gathering his modified contracts with barely controlled anger. Keep your money and your impossible conditions, but don't expect family relationships to survive this kind of manipulation. You're destroying our family for the sake of your ego. I'm not destroying anything, I replied calmly. I'm simply declining to rebuild relationships on the same foundation of conditional love and strategic manipulation that caused them to fail in the first place. Each family member had failed their test in ways that perfectly aligned with Elena's predictions about their character. They'd viewed the financial offers as opportunities to exploit rather than chances to demonstrate growth. They'd treated the accountability requirements as unreasonable obstacles rather than necessary foundations for healthy relationships. Most tellingly, none of them had expressed genuine remorse for their behavior during my cancer treatment. Their anger had been focused entirely on my refusal to provide financial benefits, without requiring personal change, not on their failures to provide emotional support during a life-threatening illness. As I sat in my apartment that Friday evening, reviewing the signed contracts that remained empty of signatures, I felt the profound relief that comes with complete clarity. My family had chosen to remain exactly who they'd always been. People who viewed relationships as transactional opportunities, rather than emotional commitments. Elena's inheritance had given me the resources to test whether they were capable of change. Their responses had given me the definitive answer I needed to move forward without them. The money they'd refused to earn through accountability was about to fund initiatives that would help thousands of people they'd never meet. Their loss would become the world's gain, which seemed like exactly the kind of poetic justice Elena would have appreciated. The final chapter of my relationship with the Thornfield family was closed. Tomorrow, I would begin writing the first chapter of a life built entirely on my own terms, funded by Elena's extraordinary gift, but guided by the strength I'd discovered through surviving both cancer and the revelation of my family's true character. The private jet that had accidentally exposed my transformation to Marcus would soon be taking me to Switzerland, not for medical treatment this time, but to establish the first international office of the Elena Vasquez Foundation for Cancer Patient Advocacy. My family thought they were punishing me by walking away from financial opportunities they couldn't access without personal accountability. They had no idea they were giving me the greatest gift possible: complete freedom to build a future worthy of everything Elena had sacrificed to make it possible. 6 months later, I stood on the terrace of the Elena Vasquez Foundation's headquarters in Zurich, watching the sun set over Lake Geneva while reviewing the quarterly impact report that would have made my grandmother proud beyond measure. The numbers told a story of transformation that went far beyond my own. 847 cancer patients provided with transportation services when family support wasn't available, 23 research grants funded for innovative treatment protocols, and 156 families given emergency financial assistance during medical crises. But it was the personal stories that truly captured what Elena's inheritance had made possible. Maria Santos, the woman who'd managed Elena's penthouse, now served as the foundation's Director of Patient Services. Her own experience watching family members struggle with cancer had given her unique insight into the practical needs that often went unaddressed by traditional medical support systems. "Ms. Vivienne," she said, joining me on the terrace with the afternoon mail that still arrived at our Swiss office despite our increasingly global operations. The thank you letters continue to arrive daily. This one is particularly special. She handed me a note written in careful script by someone whose hands had clearly been affected by chemotherapy treatments. "Dear Foundation staff, because of your transportation service, I was able to complete my entire treatment protocol, even though my family lives too far away to help. I am now cancer-free, and wanted you to know that your support meant the difference between survival and giving up. With eternal gratitude, Janet Morrison." Janet Morrison. The name triggered a memory of another Morrison I'd known, Jake, the young teacher I'd met during my own treatment at Riverside Memorial, struggling with lymphoma and managing a GoFundMe campaign for his medical expenses. I'd quietly paid off his remaining bills through the Foundation's Emergency Assistance Program, along with dozens of other patients whose situations reminded me of my own darkest moments. The Foundation had grown beyond Elena's original proposals into something that reflected both her strategic vision and my own understanding of what cancer patients truly needed when traditional support systems failed them. We provided not just financial assistance, but comprehensive advocacy services, designed to ensure that no one faced cancer alone the way I had been forced to. The board meeting agenda arrived as well, Maria continued, indicating a leather portfolio that contained updates from our satellite offices in Manhattan, Los Angeles, and most recently, Millbrook. The hometown office is officially opening next month. The decision to establish a foundation presence in Millbrook had been both practical and symbolic. The small city where I'd grown up, where my family had abandoned me during treatment, would now be home to services that ensured other families in similar situations would have alternatives to depending solely on relatives who might fail them. Dr. Nina Rodriguez, the nurse practitioner who'd observed my contradictory treatment choices at Riverside Memorial, now served as our Millbrook office director. Her understanding of the local healthcare landscape and her commitment to patient advocacy had made her the perfect choice to oversee our hometown operations. The irony wasn't lost on me that the building we'd purchased for our Millbrook office was located just 3 blocks from my parents' accounting practice on Elm Ridge Drive. My family would pass our sign every day on their way to work. Elena Vasquez Foundation for Cancer Patient Advocacy, providing support when family isn't enough. Victoria had warned me that the proximity might seem deliberately provocative, but I'd chosen the location for practical reasons. The building was perfectly suited to our needs, and its central downtown location made it easily accessible to patients throughout the Clearwater Valley region. If my family interpreted our presence as a reminder of their failures, that was their choice. The Foundation's mission was to help people, not to send messages to relatives who'd proven themselves incapable of growth. The message that did arrive, however, was unexpected. "There's also this," Maria said, handing me an envelope addressed in handwriting I recognized immediately. Gabrielle's real estate agent's script was unmistakable, though the formal tone of the address suggested this wasn't a personal correspondence. Inside was a single sheet of letterhead from her agency. "Thornfield Properties is pleased to offer comprehensive real estate services to the Elena Vasquez Foundation for any future expansion needs in the Millbrook area. Our family business has deep roots in the community and extensive experience with high-value commercial transactions." I stared at the letter for a long moment, amazed by its audacity. Gabrielle, who'd stormed out of my apartment declaring my accountability requirements financially abusive, was now attempting to secure business from the foundation she'd implicitly rejected by refusing to meet its ethical standards. The letter contained no acknowledgement of our personal relationship, no reference to her failure to support me during cancer treatment, no recognition that the foundation's resources came from the inheritance she'd tried to access without accountability. It was purely transactional, approaching the foundation as a potential client rather than recognizing any connection to the family dynamics that had inspired its creation. Victoria's response, when I called her from the terrace, was immediate and characteristically direct. "Delete it," she advised without hesitation. "Gabrielle is trying to have it both ways, maintaining her position that your accountability requirements were unreasonable while attempting to benefit financially from the foundation those resources created. It's manipulation of the highest order." "I'm not surprised," I replied, watching the last light fade over the mountains that had become my new home. "But I am impressed by the consistency. She's still treating family relationships as business opportunities to be exploited." The conversation with Victoria reminded me how much my life had changed in ways that went beyond financial resources or geographical location. The woman who'd accepted crumbs of conditional love from family members who viewed her as a burden had transformed into someone who commanded international respect for her philanthropic vision and business acumen. Meridian. Marketing had evolved alongside the foundation, with offices now in major cities across Europe and North America. The client work that had once focused on small businesses in the Clearwater Valley now included multinational corporations seeking comprehensive global marketing strategies. The modest loft above Rossetti's bakery felt like a memory from someone else's life. But perhaps the most significant change was in my relationships. The foundation had introduced me to people who understood that wealth was a tool for creating positive change rather than an entitlement to exploit. Board members like Dr. Alexandra Petrov, who'd left her exclusive Manhattan practice to serve as our medical director, and James Harrison, who'd inherited his family's manufacturing business and chosen to focus on sustainable practices rather than maximum profit extraction. These were relationships built on shared values rather than family obligation or financial opportunity. They celebrated my successes without calculating what those achievements might mean for their own circumstances. They offered support during challenges without keeping score of favors owed or benefits received. The evening's highlight came during our monthly video conference with foundation beneficiaries, where patients and families shared updates on their progress and suggestions for improving our services. Tonight's featured speaker was Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman I'd met during my own treatment at Riverside Memorial, whose Medicare coverage had left her struggling with scan costs. The Foundation's insurance advocacy program helped me navigate the appeals process when my claim was initially denied, she reported from her home computer, her granddaughter helping with the technology. But more than that, when I felt like giving up because the bureaucracy seemed impossible, your staff reminded me that fighting for my health was worth the effort. Her words triggered memories of my own bureaucratic struggles before Elena's inheritance had made insurance limitations irrelevant to my treatment choices. The Foundation's advocacy services were designed to ensure that other patients wouldn't face those barriers alone, regardless of their family support systems. As the conference concluded, I remained on the terrace, reflecting on the journey that had brought me from abandoned cancer patient to international philanthropist. Elena's inheritance had provided resources, but the real transformation had come from learning to value myself appropriately and refuse to accept less than what I deserved from any relationship. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Saw the Millbrook office announcement in the paper. Congratulations on your success. Hope you're well. M. Marcus, apparently, monitoring my foundation's activities through local media coverage. The message contained no acknowledgement of our family conflict, no recognition of his failure during my cancer treatment, no reference to the accountability requirements he'd rejected. Just a casual congratulation that assumed our relationship could continue on superficial terms despite everything that had happened. I deleted the message without responding. Some chapters of life deserve to remain closed, regardless of other people's attempts to reopen them on their own terms. As I prepared to leave the terrace for dinner with the foundation staff, I paused to look at the framed photograph on my office desk. Elena in her garden, wearing work clothes and a satisfied smile, surrounded by the roses she'd cultivated with the same patience and strategic thinking she'd applied to building her empire. "Thank you, abuela," I whispered, using the Spanish word for grandmother that she'd taught me as a child. For the money, yes, but mostly for teaching me that true wealth comes from living according to your own values, rather than other people's limitations. The private jet that had accidentally exposed my transformation to Marcus 6 months earlier was scheduled to take me to London tomorrow, where I would speak at an international conference on cancer patient advocacy. The girl who'd hidden her success above a bakery on Main Street was now recognized as a global leader in healthcare philanthropy. My family had thought they were punishing me by walking away from financial opportunities they couldn't access without personal accountability. Instead, they'd given me the gift of complete freedom to build a life worthy of Elena's extraordinary sacrifice and my own hard-won strength. The inheritance they'd tried to claim had become a foundation that would help thousands of people they'd never meet. Their loss had become the world's gain, and my liberation had become my purpose. Elena had been right about everything. Mercy without justice was weakness, justice without mercy was revenge, but finding the balance between them was the path to true strength. I'd found that balance, and it had set me free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.